Hey everybody, Billy Obenauer here, and I'm going to start recording a new type of video, a new playlist for my YouTube channel here. And this one's going to focus on tips and tricks for students. And I don't really know where this playlist is going to go, but I know a lot of times students ask me questions, and I say, you know what, it would be great if I had a place to store responses for this. And that's where I want to kind of use this playlist to help out students, my students, and other students. So in this first episode, we're going to be talking about one of the biggest questions that I get from students, which is, how do I study for an exam? Now, if you're watching this video, there's a pretty good chance that you've been in school for a while, and you probably already have your way that you like to study or your way that you think works, and you might be wondering, why are we discussing studying tips? Well, I want you to think for a minute and think, have you ever gotten a bad grade on anything like an F or a low D or something that you really weren't satisfied with? And then you went and you talked to a teacher about it to see what you could do better, and they said crazy things like study longer or study harder. And you're standing there and you're wondering, well, I did study and I studied for a long time and I studied really hard, so what else is there that I can do? Now let's think about how ridiculous those previous statements sound if we consider them in another context. I teach in a business school. I teach mostly management courses. So I want you to imagine if your business was failing and we said things like manage longer and manage harder. What does manage harder even mean? How about we said something like manage better, and maybe we trained you on how to manage better? Well, if we take this and we apply this to our current context, that would leave us with the question, what about study better? And that's what this video is going to be all about. We're all going to be talking about how do we develop a plan to study more effectively and more efficiently. Now, when I talk about studying, I often draw upon a quote from Michael Jordan. And you have to understand that one of my goals in life is for Michael Jordan to yell at me for getting this quote wrong. So, Mr. Jordan, if you're watching this video, here's your opportunity. But Michael Jordan said, you could practice shooting 8 hours a day, but if your form is off, all you're going to do is become really consistent at being a bad shooter, right? The same thing kind of applies to our studying. We could study more and study more and study more every day, but if we're not studying the right way, we're not going to become better students. We're not going to become more knowledgeable. We're just going to reinforce bad studying habits because we've got bad form. So in this video, we're going to talk about how do we fix our studying form so that we can use the energy and effort that we're putting into studying and become better students and perform better on our exams. So what does bad studying form look like? All right, for a lot of us, this looks like reading and reading and reading, and maybe it's our notes and maybe it's our textbooks, but we spend hours and hours reading, and then by the end, we get to what I call reading the words without reading the sentences. And what I mean by this is you just read 100 pages or you spent 3 hours reading, and the whole time you were doing it, you were kind of like humming song lyrics in your head and thinking about your plans for the weekend. And you know you read every word on every page, but when you're done, you don't actually remember any of it. You might be sitting there watching this video wondering why reading the words without reading the sentences is even a thing. And this is really because your brain is programmed to protect you from discomfort. So when you're reading things that you don't understand, things that are causing discomfort, and you're not really focusing on this information, it's because your brain is sort of doing its job. And being programmed to protect you from discomfort is really why I can survive trips to my in-laws. I mean, I'll go there for like 8 hours, remember about 32 seconds of what happened. My kids will be talking about things in the car. I'll be like, I don't even have any recollection of this experience. But back to what we're really talking about here with studying. What happens when we're studying is that information we don't understand causes discomfort because we know that we have a test coming up, we know we have an exam coming up, and we want to know the information because we want to do well. So when we don't understand information, we don't remember it, that's going to create some discomfort because it makes us think, well, how am I going to perform on this exam? Am I going to be okay here? So rather than confronting that, our brain actually tunes us out a little bit so we don't even focus on it. And what our brain really does is it focuses on what we already know when we study. So the things that we're already super comfortable with, we zero in on those things when we read and read and read and read, and we become better at them, but we probably didn't need to study those things in the first place. So we're focused on the things we know. We're not focused on the things we don't know, and by the time we're done, we really didn't make progress on the areas that we needed to study the most. And that is why we want to move beyond this practice of studying just by reading. So this brings us to the big question of how do we break the script? And we're going to do that in this lesson through a system that I call directed studying. And directed studying involves a few different steps. The first step is we're going to assess our knowledge. The second step is we're going to evaluate the gaps in our knowledge. We're going to identify those gaps, those areas that we need to study. Then the third step is that we're going to study only the things that we don't know. We're going to focus on just the areas that we have gaps. We're not going to worry about the things that we already know. Then the next step is we're going to reassess our knowledge and see if we made some progress, find out where we are. And then finally, we're either going to finish studying or we're going to repeat the process. As we go through these steps, and we start with step one, you might be wondering, how do we assess knowledge? Well, that's really going to depend on what resources you have available to you. So in my classes, I set up practice exams for my students in our learning management system called Brightspace. Another option might be to use Quizlets, or you might even find yourself making flashcards to assess your knowledge. However you choose to assess your knowledge, you want to make sure that you use at least 100 questions. If you use fewer than 100 questions, you're not really going to get good data on what you know and what you need to learn. As we go through these steps, and we start with step two, we're going to start looking at how do we evaluate gaps. Okay, now in evaluating gaps, our focus isn't on what questions did we get wrong or what questions were we not sure on the answers to. We're going to use those questions, but we're going to use those questions to identify the content areas that we need to focus our studying on. Okay, so in my classes where I give practice exams, I tell my students to go back into those practice exams and identify every question that they responded incorrectly to. Then I ask them to pull up their notes, or in my case, their PowerPoints from the class, and identify where those questions correspond with the PowerPoints or with the notes. Okay, once we do that, I tell them to go ahead and put a big red X on every single slide that deals with something that they responded incorrectly to. All right, and they put the big red X on these PowerPoints so that they can quickly go through the PowerPoints and identify the content areas that they needed to work on. In step three, we're going to work on studying the unknown, or focusing on those areas in which we have a little bit of opportunity to improve our performance. Now, as we do this, we want to make sure that we are focusing on content areas, not on questions. So in the earlier steps, we assessed what questions we responded incorrectly to in our assessment. We should not be focused on those questions at this point. They shouldn't be on your screen. They shouldn't be up in your notes. These are not something you want to focus on at all. Instead, you just want to look at the content areas that you marked in your notes in which you need to study. And as we look at those content areas, we're going to use different resources to reinforce our knowledge in those areas, but we're going to be very targeted in this approach. So we may use our textbook, but we're only going to use relevant paragraphs. So as I study administrative management in this example, if there's 2 to 3 paragraphs on administrative management in my textbook, that's the only part I'm going to read there. I'm not going back to the entire chapter. All right, we may look at our notes. These may be notes that we took in class, or they may be notes that the professor provides in terms of PowerPoint slides or things of that nature. But once again, we're only going to focus on the notes that are related to the content areas that we need to study, the areas that we identified in the previous step. Or we may look at video lectures that are available if we have video lectures in our classes. But once again, we're not going to watch the entire video lecture. If I'm focusing on reinforcing material and administrative management, and there's 45 seconds of a video that focuses on administrative management, I'm going to watch that 45 seconds and nothing else until I'm working on a different content area. In step 4, once we're done studying, we're going to reassess ourselves. And in this step, we're really going to just repeat what we did in step 1, but it's critically important that you make sure you do that with at least 100 questions again. Often at this point, we're kind of exhausted from studying and we kind of want to move on, and it's really easy to assess ourselves with 25 or 30 questions. But again, we're not going to get good data if we do that, so it's important to make sure that we reassess ourselves with at least 100 questions. In step 5, we've got to make the decision about, do we repeat this process or do we finish studying? And this is really a subjective decision, and you're going to have to go through a little bit of a thought process here and make some decisions as you do this. So first of all, you're going to have to look at, are you happy with your reassessment? And what I mean by that is, if you scored an 82 on your reassessment, then you're probably going to get an exam grade somewhere in the 75 to 85 range, something like that. Are you happy with that? Does that meet your goals? And if it does, then great, you're ready to finish studying. And if it doesn't, you might want to consider repeating. Another question that you're going to look at is, do you feel prepared for the exam? So sometimes somebody does that reassessment, they've done 100 questions, they get 90 of them right, but they really just don't feel good about the responses. Okay, and in that case, you may want to go through and you may want to repeat the process, but you may want to also consider questions that you got correct or you responded correctly to, but were uncomfortable with as you try to assess the areas that you need to focus your studying on. And then finally, you got to think about, well, what are the trade-offs? Okay, so time is a finite resource, right? We don't have all the time in the world. There's 24 hours in a day, 7 days in a week, 52 weeks in a year, right? And you may be studying for your HR exam, but you may also have an accounting exam. So if you put another 10 hours into studying for your HR exam, what's going to happen on that accounting exam, right? So maybe you have to consider, hey, I do need to put a little bit of time into something else. That might be something you need to consider as well. And then finally, I just want to remind you that as we go through this studying process, unlike Kent Brockman in the Springfield Marathon, we can't take any shortcuts. Okay, this process is designed to work a very specific way, and when students follow this process the way it's intended, I find that they are very successful. When it doesn't work, I often find that people took shortcuts. So instead of using 100 questions to assess themselves, they might have used 40 or something of that nature. Okay, so if you want to put the time in to make this work, make sure you actually put in the time. And again, this is a studying process that is not intended to be all done in one night. This is part of your process as you prepare for an exam. So this is something you may do over the course of a week or so. Okay, but just make sure you put the time in, don't take shortcuts, and this should really help you. All right, before I let you go here, I've got one final important reminder for you, and this is really the final reminder here. I just want you to remember that you are so much more important than one exam. Often students get really stressed out about an exam, and they'll allow it to impact their mental well-being and their mental health, but exams are a portion of what we do in school, but they don't define us. Okay, we are not saving lives taking exams. This doesn't mean I don't want you to focus and try to do your best, but don't let your exams get you down. There's much more important things in life. You are a special person, you are loved, and this video is meant to help you, but don't let it pressure you. All right, everybody, thank you so much for joining me here in this video and letting me share this studying technique with you. I really hope it helps you. This is Billy Obenauer signing off saying, have a great day and good luck with whatever it is that you're preparing for.